Obviously, COVID has been a huge macroeconomic shock. I think the figures that I looked at most recently were looking at, just a drop in remittance payments across the industry in the 20% range. So, it's 20% less income that's being sent home. And, that obviously has, really sad repercussions for the individuals who are counting on those funds. From the Stellar perspective, there's also another layer to the story, which is the businesses themselves that facilitate these payments. And in my role at the Stellar Development Foundation, I work with a lot of these businesses. They're our partners. And so, for them, this is also a loss of revenue. This is a total change in, their kind of everyday business and operations. And so I think kind of one anecdote that felt like a win in our ecosystem, maybe in a really dark time, was we have a partner in particular that, had much of their remittance payments collected in person via networks of kind of community grocery stores, for example, where customers would come in, give cash, send a payment home. And so obviously that flow of funds was disrupted as we had the mass shutdowns. And so what our partner was able to do was to launch a new corridor. There was anchor, what we call anchors on the Stellar network, basically a payment gateway corridor available on Stellar for another country. This is a market, this company in particular, it didn't have a huge audience around it, but they launched some digital marketing campaigns, deployed this new corridor easily on the back end with Stellar, and they were able to kind of start a new customer segment and flow of funds that really helped to support their business. And they've seen it grow, 3x in terms of the volume of payments they're processing to that market for customers. In particular, this was for Nigeria. So I think, that was kind of, when we think about how a platform like Stellar or other distributed ledgers are really supporting remittances, it's infrastructure. And so for remittance companies to be able to quickly deploy new payment corridors at an infrastructure level, I do think that's something that's exciting for us to see. And then I guess one other thing I'll say to your point.
Are you talking about sort of you guys sitting on the back end, not necessarily facing these end clients, but refurbishing, the core infrastructure of, some of these remittance companies?
Sure. So traditionally, this partner in Europe, they would execute their payments to a country like Nigeria using more traditional flows. And through their integration with Stellar, there's now many companies that can offer them a new kind of payment gateway infrastructure to send cross-border payments. And so, when suddenly they had a macroeconomic shock that affected how their customers, how they could reach their customers, slows down their ability to process payments, which of course hits their revenue, they can look at Stellar and say, can we quickly launch new payment corridors? Can we quickly work with the new partners and kind of try to, on the retail side, market to a new customer base, but on the infrastructure side, our ability to work in a new region, our ability to kind of launch a new payment corridor is quite simple. It's all on one network. It's all very standardized. So their ability to kind of launch payments into a new market, within a period of a month or two was quite fast. And I think big picture, that's what we see infrastructure like Stellar really enabling for remittance businesses. The ability to have many different countries and corridors that they can execute with a single integration.
You haven't really mentioned like where Lumens fits into this. Have these tokens tied to these networks become less relevant to the build out of, some of these remittance infrastructures?
Sure. So I would say at this point in time, no. So the way I look at Lumens is Stellar is a multi-asset platform. Fundamentally, what we do is tokenize financial value. Typically, that's in currency because that's the money that most of the people in the world hold. So if we want to do a remittance payment, we're going, in the example I was just speaking to, from euros to naira. However, right now, Lumens are the most liquid asset in the Stellar ecosystem. and they provide sources of liquidity for value to move across outside of the traditional banking system. So, while a retail remittance customer may not be sending Lumens when they're making a payment from Europe to Nigeria, on the back end, they may definitely be leveraging liquidity tied to Lumen fiat pairs in order to execute that transaction more peer-to-peer, faster and more quickly. So Lumens definitely are oftentimes in the flow of funds for the transactions we're executing across our network.
What do those new corridors matter?
But that, I think that's, the onus should always be on products to make the experience of technologies like Ripple or Stellar easy to use and really seamless. And, there's a point that I wanted to make, which I feel like we're kind of dancing around right now, which is, from our perspective, this also reiterates the importance of open financial networks and having global infrastructure in which innovation can happen rapidly and it can happen locally, so that we can really have entrepreneurs creating access points that serve people, and we don't have to wait for, always kind of like large incumbents to innovate in order to reach new consumers. A kind of simple example of this is, we have a company based in South Africa that's now integrated a WhatsApp native Stellar wallet. And so it means that essentially through just texting and chatting with a bot on WhatsApp, a customer can start to hold value, digital asset value, in this case, 1-for-1 backed ZAR token. They can send payments to other people, and you can continue to build out an economy around that where you can start doing things like merchant payments. And, South Africa is like a relatively highly banked place, but you can imagine scenarios like this happening in other countries where by having open financial infrastructure in which entrepreneurs and innovators can join the same network and try to create access points that are more workable or more realistic for their communities. I think this is a migration we're seeing that, at least for me, is very exciting.
Different types of assets on.
Yeah, listen, I think about the Transferwise value prop versus the Stellar ecosystem value prop a lot. And I would think about it kind of at the enterprise level as well as the retail level. So, Transferwise is a great company. They've done amazing things. They have an amazing product, which, lots of people are really satisfied with. They've raised $700 million or more in order to build the infrastructure that they've set up all over the world. And, I think that's
from Asheesh.
Yeah, I think that's great, but I would say that, there's a handful of companies that can do something like that. And an alternative is to create standardized open financial networks that can enable a marketplace of endpoints that we can then have many applications, many payment companies leveraging. So instead of everybody having to build all of their own infrastructure or having a company build their infrastructure and then sell it to everyone else, we can cooperate and, through things like distributed ledger technology, build these open financial networks. And so on the enterprise level, I think that there's room for large enterprises like Transferwise to leverage these points, these new endpoints to some extent, but I do think that it's going to be challengers who really take these models and run with it. On the retail side, and kind of going to your question about, what trends do we see that kind of are showing that this part of the market is kind of winning, I do think the huge rise in stablecoins, while not necessarily directly tied to remittance, when we kind of take a step back, is moving the entire digital asset ecosystem a huge step closer. I think consumer and retail awareness, especially across emerging markets, of these types of products will bleed into how people expect to receive cross-border payments and remittances, and kind of open up this idea of being able to hold a digital form of your money and do something with it. So what a Transferwise user can't do right now is, receive a remittance from the US to Nigeria, hold that digital dollar for as long as they want, and then maybe go toss it into some cool yield farming thing that's, you know, up and running. Mm-hmm. Transferwise can't offer that right now, and their infrastructure isn't capable of offering a product like that. But companies that build on open financial networks with digital asset infrastructure, they can. And I think kind of combining these new types of products with more traditional remittances is a really exciting space and something that will challenge the Transferwise model.
You want to weigh in here, Lisa?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I agree with, you know, much of what Asheesh is saying. And I think, you know, there is kind of implicit counterparty risk that we just don't think about, I think, every day. And what, you know, digital asset infrastructure does is just kind of bring that to the surface. You know, if I'm holding my money in Citibank and it goes bust, I can't go to Bank of America and say, you know, give me my funds back. That's not how it works. A dollar is held with a counterparty. And, you know, I agree. I'm excited to see the evolution of the types of institutions that are issuing these assets. But I think that they need to, you know, I think counterparty-free digital assets and, you know, counterparty-based assets will work together in an ecosystem. And they're, you know, when stablecoins first emerged, you know, I think because they weren't reserved back, we didn't really, you know, at least the first generations of them, at least in the way that we typically see them on Stellar, which is backed by the currency that they're representing. The counterparty question it didn't come out as much, but, you know, within our ecosystem, that's very apparent. It's important. And, you know, the big value that an asset like Lumens is providing is it is allowing for the exchange of two counterparty assets in a trustless way. Whenever we're crossing international borders, you know, there's legal and financial implications to doing those types of trades. And I think that cryptographic assets really unlock our ability to create efficiency in these markets and get rid of, you know, essentially the gatekeepers that do this, you know, the you know, 3 institutions that I guess we can trust to move money from one country to another. It gives us a much more open and decentralized way to enable those types of exchanges.
A lot of incumbents are run for their digital money.
Yeah, I think so. I'm happy to jump in here. You know, I think, you know, I certainly think Facebook and Libra as a platform with, as you mentioned, 2 billion users has, you know, a chance at becoming the world's largest banking platform. I mean, I don't think that is a complete, you know, that's a completely insane idea. But I think what this does, and, you know, the CBDC discussion also kind of was touching on this, is, you know, ask at what part of the tech stack does a company like Libra really make sense? And so, you know, I think there's a huge amount of opportunity for any digitally native platform that has built up such a huge consumer base to, you know, start extending payment as a service products, to start offering types of financial services to those users. I do, however, question why they need to own and operate an underlying infrastructure to do that. And in fact, why they would want to. You know, I think all of us here have some experience in how complex and difficult it is to, you know, build large distributed systems that are efficient and operate well, and then B, kind of garner adoption and trust in them. You know, that is a non-trivial task. And so, you know, I think there's a lot of opportunity. You know, Libra, I think, really pushed some interesting ideas into the space, but our opinion is that, you know, platforms can offer access, but to try to own the infrastructure layer that kind of tracks and traces and provides a source of truth is kind of like unnecessary at this point. So I'm excited to see how the project progresses. And I do think it could be something that interoperates well with the infrastructure that, you know, myself at Stellar Development Foundation and others are building.
Is that something you're seeing?
Sure. I mean, I'll hold the definition of significant to the person asking the question, but yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, something that's been interesting for us is we early on kind of focused on remittance as a use case, and you know, worked with a lot of companies in the remittance space, and continue to do. As we kind of built up some of those volumes, we've seen a really strong growth in the corporate payments vertical as well. And particularly in supporting execution of things like corporate payments across emerging market corridors. So, you know, and I think that has been exciting for us. And, you know, the way this technology works is those flows oftentimes offset each other and kind of make the entire network that much more efficient. And, you know, you know, I think that there's a number of reasons why we've seen growth in corporate payments. I mean, from just a practical standpoint, less customers. It's kind of, if you're launching new businesses or line of business, it's a very practical way to, you know, start with larger value transaction sizes. It's also less of a margins business, which, you know, I'll be the first to say that, you know, our end goal with Stellar is payments as fast and as cheap as possible. But when you're launching a new corridor, a little bit of margin is nice to have as you're working towards creating that efficiency. So it's been really great. I would say that along with remittances, we've seen continued growth in our enterprise ecosystem around things like corporate payments, and as well touching on things like supply chain. So, something I'd like to add here, just to kind of highlight something specific to remittances, is from a regulatory standpoint, I think we're going to see perhaps a somewhat unfortunate tension between countries that are strong remittance receivers, but also have a lot of capital controls that create tension between our ability to facilitate like more efficient payments in country. You know, basically blocking those types of activities because there's kind of seen as kind of crypto or open financial infrastructure as being a threat to things like capital controls. I mean, you know, I would say that having major remittance receivers or countries like China and India kind of going back and forth in their policy stance, it's unfortunate because I think that there's so much opportunities in those markets. You know, look at things like, you know, East Africa, China corridor and the amount of trade that's done there. And there's really big opportunities to leverage platforms to gain efficiencies in those markets. But, you know, it's difficult. Oh, are we done? Hello? Oh. Or maybe that was just me. No.
No, continue. I don't know what happened.
Well, that's it. So I think it will be, you know, I think that there's a lot to see kind of going forward, but I have noticed this tension myself, and I don't think it's going to be going away anytime soon.